The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Go, Pierre.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is still acting like a firefighter who's setting fires. Now he's blaming immigration on bad actors instead of himself. He decided to open the door to 725,000 asylum seeker requests in 5 years. He approved a 211% increase in international students. He allowed foreign workers in communities with high levels of unemployment. If there are bad actors, should he not look in the mirror? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think that Canadians expect any responsible government to take decisive actions, and you saw the levels I tabled last week, a 20% decrease in permanent resident, and the PBO himself has said that we have to meet our housing needs, and the member across the way wants to go to election. He has no plan. Perhaps in terms of math, he said that they'll build 6 units, and he can count to 6. So, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Maniac masquerading as a firefighter, this time on immigration. He blames bad actors for his decisions on that destroyed our immigration system. He decided to increase and open the door to 726% more asylum claims. He decided to approve 211% more international students. He decided to lift the ban on temporary foreign workers in communities with already high unemployment. If the Prime Minister is hunting for the quote-unquote bad actors who ruined the system, will he have a look in the mirror?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we'll take any lessons from someone who spent the last 20 years lighting fires in the House of Commons. That's it. We put forward a plan 2 weeks ago to reduce immigration levels by 20%. Canadians expect us to be responsible and to react to their needs. That's what we're doing with this plan. The Parliamentary Budget Officer himself has said that this new plan will reduce housing needs by 50%. That's what Canadians want. It's responsible.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Minister first denied that he and his company were profiting off government business, and then text messages showed the contrary. They referred to a Randy. Well, he claimed that it was another Randy. We now know there is no other Randy. We know he falsely claimed he was Indigenous in order so that his company could steal resources that were meant for real Indigenous people. And now his company address matches the address of a place that was the location of 2 cocaine busts. Any one of these things would be a resigning offense. Why won't he resign now? Yeah.
Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, I know the person referred to in today's article. I've never met that person. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. Those are the facts.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Apparently the person he doesn't know is himself. He says that he's not the Randy in the text messages, but his own business associates say there is no other Randy. He says that he said that he was Indigenous in order that he could get grants and contracts that were meant just for Indigenous people. Now he admits he's not Indigenous at all. And now, while his company has the same address as a place that has 2 cocaine busts, he says he doesn't know the person involved in that address either. Does this minister even know who he is?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, the article states...
And ask all members, please. There's the Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development from the top.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the person referred to in the article today. I've never met her. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. The article states that fact, and that is the fact.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After the Prime Minister took his private jet, burned 105 tons of jet fuel, and emitted 300 tons of greenhouse gases to go down to Brazil, he claimed that Canadians who are opposed to his carbon tax are just confused by disinformation. No, Canadians aren't stupid, Mr. Speaker. They know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has calculated that 100% of middle-class Canadians pay more in the tax than they get back. The Prime Minister already also said, though, that this will be the subject of the next election. I couldn't agree more. So why don't we have a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for Order. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources. And
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, it would be nice if the Leader of the Opposition was not spouting disinformation and misinformation in the House. At the end of the day, 8 out of 10 Canadian families, the vast majority of Canadians, get more money back. It is those that actually live on the most modest incomes that are the best off as a result of the price on pollution. But I would also say it is a price on pollution. It is about addressing climate change, something that organization across the way simply has no idea how to do and does not care.
then I had
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The next few hours will be critical for our agriculture. Senators Peter Boehm and Peter Harder have literally sabotaged Bill C-282. They amended it to prevent it from protecting supply management in existing trade agreements. Imagine, while Donald Trump wants to reopen NAFTA, these guys want to serve him supply management on a silver platter. The Senate could vote on this amendment as early as tomorrow. So all the party leaders have to speak out, starting with the Prime Minister. Will he ask the senators to defeat the amendment and save supply management?
then I have
The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, on this side of the House, we're asking senators to support Bill C-282 in its original form, because we do believe in supply management. We believe in our farmers. Canada, whether it's dairy farmers or others, to ensure that they do have protection. We agree with the Bloc, and we want to pass this legislation in its original form.
then I have
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Their excuse is that they're saying that the independence of senators is at stake, but they appointed them, and they are sabotaging C-82. One of them even advised the Prime Minister. And what's more, they're both fighting to sponsor government bills. So let's be serious. The Prime Minister can and must demand that senators pass Bill C-282 as voted by all parties in this House. We're talking about the future of supply management. It's serious. Will all the leaders in this House demand that senators vote against this amendment?
then I have
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague, this House, Canadians, all they know that a Liberal government will vote for this bill in its full form, and it's a good question. Will the Conservative Party leader ask the senators, the Conservative senators, to vote for this bill in its original integral form?
Alors, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, people are having a hard time making ends meet. Rents have doubled, and grocery prices just don't make sense anymore. Clearly, the Liberals have let people down. And the Conservatives, they're going to cut everything, including the Canada Child Benefit and dental care. Who's going to pay the price? Quebecers. We at the NDP are going to eliminate taxes on basic products like food, hydro, internet, and cell phone bills. Will the Liberals eliminate the GST on basic necessities?
Then I have
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. our colleague is right in terms of the importance of supporting the middle class and all those who are working hard to join it. And that is why it's really sad to see the Conservatives voting against dental care. And the NDP also worked really hard to put it in place. So 1 million Quebecers now have their dental care card, and they want to move forward with this in 2025. We're going to sign up more Quebecers and Canadians between 18 years and up.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, working and now middle-class families are cutting back on their groceries. They're getting less and getting gouged at the till by greedy CEOs. Liberals let this happen and are letting families down. Conservatives will cut and cost families even more. They'll take away important services like dental care, costing families thousands of dollars a year. The NDP's tax-free essentials plan removes the GST from grocery items to bring families relief. Will the Liberals take the tax off grocery items so Canadians can get a break?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree with the member that what we're going to see from the Conservative is cut, Mr. Speaker. Right. They're going to cut dental care. They're going to cut child benefit. Mr. Speaker, Canadians at home know that on this side of the House, we will always stand for the middle class. We will always stand on those who are working hard to join the middle class. We will fight for Canadians as we've done on grocery. We will build more homes, Mr. Speaker. We will create economic opportunities. We will fight for workers. We will create jobs. We will create opportunities and possibilities for this country so the middle class can thrive, Mr. Speaker.
On a couple of occasions, I've caught the voice of the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby. I'm going to ask him, please, to not speak when he's not recognised by the House. The honourable member from Thornhill.
It seems like every time the employment minister finds rock bottom, it keeps getting worse. First, he said he wasn't the Randy involved in his company, but we know there was only one Randy at his company. He said he wasn't involved with his company while in cabinet, and text messages reveal that he is. He said that he was Indigenous to profit from government contracts stealing from First Nations communities, and now there's new news of coordinating business activities with drug smugglers and convicts. This is the behavior of a low-life fraud, not a federal cabinet minister. Simple question. How does that guy still have his job?
Order. Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, despite the innuendo, here are the facts. I don't know the person in question. I never met that person in question. And Mr. Speaker, those are simply the facts. The article even says that I've never met the person in question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Speaker, here are the facts. He flaunts the ethics rules. He claims a false identity. He gets caught in a web of lies. That's what the Prime Minister rewards after 9 years. With each passing day, we find out more about the Employment Minister's scams and schemes, and we learn that he's just a phony and a fraud. Canadians want to know. Indigenous communities who stole from him, who he stole from, want to know. And Liberal backbenchers want to know when the Prime Minister is going to fire that Cabinet Minister.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the person in the article from today. I've never met the person in the article from today. Those are the facts. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives may not like it, but it's actually in the article that I don't know the person in question. Never met them.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal minister from Alberta is a fake and a fraud. He said he was not the Randy involved in his company, but we know that there's only one Randy. He said he wasn't involved in his company at the cabinet table.
I'm going to ask colleagues. Today we've been skating close to the line in terms. Excuse me, colleagues. I will start my comment again if you would give me the privilege of listening. several occasions today, we've been skating close to the line in terms of what's acceptable language. The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, I think, has skated over that line and accusing a direct member. Can I ask the honourable member to withdraw that comment and start his question from the top, please?
Restart, Speaker, that this Liberal minister from Alberta has been implicated in fraud and media reports. Today, we've seen that. It's very clear.
I'm not certain if I was having trouble hearing the member. I don't think I heard the withdraw. If you could withdraw and start again, I'd appreciate it. If members were not to take the floor while a member is being recognized, the Speaker will be able to hear the member. The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Withdrawing the previous words, Speaker, we'll talk about this Liberal minister from Alberta who has been implicated in media reports in fraud. Some of them he's even apologized for. He misrepresented his identity, claiming to be Indigenous, trying to steal contracts from people who are in fact Indigenous. This same minister said that he wasn't the Randy at his own company. We know that there was only one Randy at that company. It's pandemic profiteering. We know that there's allegations of fraud. Why is it that this Prime Minister just won't fire that minister?
The honourable minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite just said is simply not true.
The honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's unbelievable that with the cocaine connections to the Liberal minister from Alberta, that those Liberals, that Prime Minister, want to allow him to continue to be in cabinet. He said that he was Indigenous to try and steal contracts from individuals who are Indigenous. That's okay as long as you are a Liberal. The company is involved in more than half a dozen lawsuits because of fraud, and that's okay as long as you're a Liberal. They came before committee and said things that we now know weren't true, like it must have been some other Randy. If he won't resign, why won't this Prime Minister fire that fraudster?
Again, members at the very last possible moment used a word which would not be considered acceptable. Can I just ask the honourable member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes to please withdraw that last word?
I'll withdraw the last word. He should be fired.
I thank the honourable member. The honourable minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite said, once again, is not true.
The honourable member for Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages campaigned as a successful entrepreneur, but he's an imposter. We know that he said he wasn't involved in his company when he was a minister, but the text messages show the opposite. He was taking money destined for First Nations communities. He said he was a journalist even though he was a lobbyist. When will the Prime Minister fire this professional fake? The Honourable Minister of Employment and Workforce Development. Mr. Speaker, despite the insinuations, I've never met that person in question in today's article. I've never dealt with her. I've never met her. Those are the facts. The honourable member from Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, there are so many Randys that they didn't even understand the question I asked him. But the Minister of Official Languages presented himself as a successful entrepreneur and journalist, but he said he worked for Radio-Canada and Les Affaires, and even the editor-in-chief of Les Affaires said it was obvious he wasn't a journalist. He was a uncovered, even though the Prime Minister made many efforts to protect him. When will the Prime Minister fire his fake minister? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the statements of that member are false.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is unable to acknowledge that he's responsible for the crises caused by the rapid increase in immigration. Even in his mea culpa yesterday, he was still looking for someone to blame. It's the pandemic's fault. It's the fault of businesses or schools. Yet he's the one who issued every permit. He's the one who took over McKinsey's immigration targets despite our warnings. He's the one who raised the targets to 500,000 people a year despite warnings from his own civil service. When will he finally admit that he's the one who's responsible? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, I think the member has spent a little too much time in Ottawa to say that the federal government controls absolutely everything, but he knows in full well that the government of Quebec also controls things. We do have our side of the responsibility. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. It's not as if anyone had told him to be careful with the immigration targets. His own officials warned him back in 2022 that his immigration thresholds would exacerbate the crises in housing and access to public services. The Bloc has been warning him for years that taking on the Century Initiative's immigration targets would be totally irresponsible. Quebec has been warning him for 2 years that our welcoming capacity has been exceeded. Does the Prime Minister realize now that we wouldn't be facing the current crisis if he had listened and thought things through instead of insulting everyone? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Well, in terms of their ability to welcome people, if we had listened to provincial governments, there might have been a significant increase, because the last time CAC mentioned this, when they made decreases, they had, well, now they're facing the situation with the international students, and it's a shared situation. The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. It's confusing. The Prime Minister couldn't have just acted faster on immigration. He should have acted faster. He should have considered the capacity of the country before drastically increasing the population as he did. Second, he should have listened to all the people's warnings that it wasn't working, but he was too blinded by his own multiculturalist pipe dream to base his immigration policies on facts and reality. Does he realize that yesterday's mea culpa is far too little, far too late, and far too easy after so much irresponsibility? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Let's remind everyone of the facts. Since 2009, the Quebec government tripled immigration in some areas that they control. These are the facts where we're going to work together to reduce this. The plan that I put forward last week proposes a 20% reduction. It's responsible, it's important, it's what Canadians and Quebecers are asking us for.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The minister from Edmonton is a fake and a phony. He said that he was not the Randy...
I'm going to ask, this is a couple of times that I've asked the honourable members. I'm going to ask the honourable members again to remember, when they speak directly to members, they have to be, of course, extend to them all the respect that each member, as members, are deserving of. So I'm going to ask the honourable member, please, to rephrase this question to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, this minister deserves to be criticized in the People's House, the House of Commons. He said he was not the Randy involved in his company, but we know there's only one Randy at the company. He said he wasn't involved in the operations of the company, but text messages reveal that he is. He said he was Indigenous to profit from government contracts, trying to steal from First Nations communities. When will the Prime Minister fire this phony for making false claims to steal from First Nations?
invite all members to be very judicious in terms of their use of their language in this place. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my colleague has addressed this issue and stated that those claims are false. Mr. Speaker, we addressed the fact that that business was never listed as an Indigenous business on the procurement site, and it in fact received no funding from the Government of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good answer.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The company did actually receive funding from the Government of Canada. The Minister of Employment's business partner claimed that their company was fully Indigenous owned. How would he have gotten that impression? Maybe because the Liberal Party repeatedly said that the minister was Indigenous. Now, it is possible to get kicked out of the Liberals' Indigenous caucus, not for corruption, but for refusing to participate in corruption, as Jody Wilson-Raybould found out. After 9 years, they've gone from firing the first Indigenous Attorney General to keeping the first fake Indigenous Minister of Employment. When will the Prime Minister fire this phony minister?
I'm going to encourage all members to be more judicious in their use of their words and referring directly to other members. The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Service Public,
Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our colleague knows full well that in the House we have to choose the right words to express things properly. He would like to, if he'd like to know more about the procurement process and in favor of Indigenous companies, well, it's really important for Canadians. He should ask it so in a respectful way, and I would be happy to meet with him to explain to him how things work. I will encourage the honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent, please, to not speak until he's recognized by the chair.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's only minister from Alberta is accused of being a fake and a fraud. The member from Edmonton Centre said he wasn't the Randy involved in his company. Yet we know he is the only Randy involved in that company. He said he wasn't involved with his company while in cabinet, yet text messages clearly show that he was. Right. He pretended to be Indigenous to profit from government contracts, effectively stealing from First Nations businesses. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. When will the Prime Minister do his job and fire that minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, my colleague has addressed those issues that the colleague raises, and he has clarified that they are false. Mr. Speaker, we have stated that that business was not listed as an Indigenous business, and it did not receive funding through that program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very good.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, families are getting gouged on essentials by greedy CEOs. Liberals have let families down. And the Conservatives, all they're planning to do is cut like the National School Food Program, making kids go hungry. But there's good news, Mr. Speaker. The NDP's plan to remove GST on life essentials like kids, clothing, and diapers will bring relief to so many families. Will the Liberals follow the NDP's lead and cut the GST so families can get ahead?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Children.
As the members rightly pointed out, on this side of the House, we're moving forward with a national school food program, which we've heard again and again the leader of the Conservative Party call bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker, is not what is happening. We are seeing thousands of children already this school year receive food at school because of this investment in our children. We'll continue to work with the provinces to see this roll out across the country, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian families are getting gouged on essentials while the biggest corporations are posting massive profits. And the Liberals could have prevented this, but instead they've let Canadians down. Now, Conservative cuts would make matters far worse. In fact, cutting childcare alone would cost Canadian families up to $13,000 per child. The NDP has a plan to take the GST off essentials like home heat, phone and internet bills, kids' clothing. Will the Liberals do it?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, it's great to hear this member speak about the importance of the investments that we've made in childcare. Mr. Speaker, we've seen almost 1 million families. These are real people, Mr. Speaker, that we've been able to support to get them into affordable, high-quality childcare, saving them thousands of dollars each and every year. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have made it clear they do not support affordable childcare. They will do everything they can to take this away from the families that need it.
I'm going to invite ministers and members of the opposition to have their conversations outside and not on over the floor while someone else is speaking or has the microphone. Then the Honourable Member from Fleetwood, Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, we found out the Conservative leader is silencing his own caucus, barring them from promoting federal housing funds in their own constituencies. One Conservative MP told CBC MPs are being stopped from helping their cities for partisan reasons. Conservative MPs, like the member for Kelowna Lake Country, whose community is receiving over $31 million in federal funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund, have had a pretty rough time back in the riding. So, can the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities tell us about the impact Conservative leaders' cuts would have on Kelowna?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
You may have seen the news, Mr. Speaker, but last week the Conservatives had a very bad week. First, their leader went out in public to announce that he was cutting billions of dollars in funding directly to communities to build more homes, but later it was revealed that his MPs were advocating for that fund and were since banned from advocating on behalf of their communities. I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but my constituents want to make sure that they're the boss, not the leader of our party up here. Seems that is not true. But when we look at the example in Kelowna, let's take a look at what the mayor said. To replace this funding, he would need to look at other options like borrowing, reserves, or tax increases. Tax increases on the Conservative side, money for communities.
It's very clear to the Speaker that everybody got a lot of rest during this last week. Going to ask members, please, once again, don't take the floor unless they're being addressed. The Honourable Member, for the Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, it's clear that this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost or the corruption. Now we have a Minister of Employment who says he sees nothing, he hears nothing, he knows nothing, but there's too much here to pass up. First, he claimed he wasn't the other Randy implicated in his business partner's text messages. We now know that he was. Then he claimed that he had no active role in his company's operations while he served in cabinet. We now know that he did. And we now know that he claimed Indigenous heritage and status, and it was a complete fabrication. These attempts to steal funds earmarked for Indigenous companies is fraudulent. When will be enough for this Prime Minister? When will he fire this minister?
The Honourable Minister for Public Works and Procurement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Deux premières.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two things. First of all, what the member just said is false. And secondly, the minister has explained himself repeatedly. What we have still not heard today is why the Conservative leader still has taken hundreds of days to get his security briefing, not just to protect himself, but to protect his own members. His only priority is to trigger an election. How can he expect to hold an election without being able to protect the security of his party and his members?
From Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this minister keeps explaining himself, but the answers aren't coming. The minister's facing multiple scandals. We know that his company has been charged with fraud. We know that he was illegally involved while he served in cabinet. We know that the minister for years claimed that he had Indigenous heritage, and we now know that's a complete fabrication. And today we learned that the minister's company shared a post office box with a known international cocaine dealer. At best, the minister has shown abhorrent judgment, and at worst, he is completely corrupt. The fact that this Prime Minister continues to have confidence in him demonstrates exactly why he's not fit to lead this country. When will this Prime Minister fire this minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague has stated that those are all false, and he did not know this person in question. But if you want to talk about fit for leadership, you should be asking his own leader why he has not yet gotten a security clearance. Because if that's someone who wants to lead the country, they should probably know what risks are facing Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are wondering why the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada has not gotten a security clearance. Thank you,
yes, they are wondering that.
The Honourable Member from Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. The Prime Minister is jetting around the globe promoting his failed carbon tax while Canadians line up at the food banks. According to the Prime Minister, the carbon tax is, quote, the best tool out there, and anyone who disagrees is using, quote, propaganda. But Canada's Environment Commissioner disagrees. He revealed the Liberals will not meet their own emission targets despite quadrupling the carbon tax.
That's right.
It's all pain and no gain. So will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's disingenuous for the Conservatives to continually link the food bank situation in Canada with carbon pricing. There's a 108-page report that they produced. The Food Banks Canada came forward and made 4 recommendations around Canada's social safety net. And not once in that 108-page report did they mention the carbon tax or carbon pricing, because they know that Canada's carbon rebate that comes out 4 times a year supports Canadians, particularly lower and middle income Canadians, Mr. Speaker. They should cut out the misinformation and stop being so disingenuous, particularly on the backs of lower income Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, here are the facts. After 9 years of this Liberal government's posturing, Canada has the worst environmental performance in the G7. The Environment Commissioner found that emissions reductions weren't because of anything government did. They're thanks to a review of data and a change in methodology. In short, Mr. Speaker, the 2 Liberal carbon taxes don't work, and now the government's planning a 3rd carbon tax. An overall export tax. If they're so sure of themselves, why don't they call an election on it? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment. Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for that question. It's a very important question. Canada's performance and industry's performance when it comes to climate change is important.
The oil and gas sector is the one that's continually increasing their emissions, and we're challenging the oil and gas industry with a pollution cap. We're asking them to invest some of their astonishing $66 billion in profit in making their products more efficient and lowering the carbon intensity of their oil. That's a good challenge, Mr. Speaker.
Well said, well said.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, the media recently reported that fraudsters were taking full advantage of CRA and claiming bogus tax refunds. According to Radio-Canada, the agency hasn't understood the need to clean up its act. Instead of going after fraud and malpractice, they've launched a witch hunt to find out who's talking to reporters. Managers have even gone so far as to spy on employees' computers. They don't want to deal with the problem, they just want to shoot the messengers. Will the minister ask the agency to track down on fraudsters instead of whistleblowers? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are situations that need to be reported, and that's why we supported a block bill. But, Mr. Speaker, if I were to publicly share information that's comes under the Income Tax Act, I could be liable to 7 years imprisonment. Mr. Speaker, employee staff, agency staff also need to protect the tax base. So it's important to remind them of their duties and obligations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Imagine fraudsters have gotten millions of dollars in bogus tax refunds because CRA didn't check before transferring the money. So the agency wrote to its staff, not to ask them to tighten up the checks, to ask them to keep their mouths shut. Management thinks the main problem isn't fraud, it's the media. We need accountability, and accountability starts with protecting whistleblowers, not fraudsters. Will the minister do something about the total lack of ethics in CRA senior management? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is mixing things up. There are two very distinct things here, but I can assure him that when it comes to CRA, we take fraud very seriously. We have very professional teams working on fraud. We have strategies. We work in partnership with the RCMP, with financial institutions, with our international partners. There are a number of levels of security to catch these fraudsters, and I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that the agency is a prime target, obviously, with the benefits and the checks that we pay out, but we are doing a good job all the same.
The Honourable Member from Battlefords, Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Now, the Prime Minister got on his taxpayer-funded carbon-emitting jet, flew to Brazil, and bragged about how great his punitive carbon tax is. His carbon tax has done nothing for the environment while literally making life's basic necessities unaffordable. The Prime Minister called it the best tool out there, but the only tool that Canadians want is a ballot box. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's emissions are lower now than they've been since all of Connor McDavid's life. Last time they were this low was 1997. Our emissions are down because of industrial carbon pricing, because of pricing on consumer fuels, and because of the over 100 measures that this government has undertaken to lower our emissions and protect the environment. And what have the Conservatives done over that same time? They voted against every single measure, Mr. Speaker. It's not just us that think carbon pricing is effective, it's also William Nordhaus, who has a Nobel Prize to prove it. So if even one Conservative economist, if they could find one that said they got a solution for fighting climate change, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely.
The Honourable Member from Battlefords, Lloydminster.
Under this Prime Minister's carbon tax regime, grocery prices have skyrocketed to the point that scurvy is now a serious health concern in Canada. 27 cases of scurvy have been identified in northern Saskatchewan. The Prime Minister wants to blame, quote, propaganda, misinformation, and flat-out lies for opposition to his carbon tax. But unlike him, Canadians do not get to turn a blind eye to the affordability challenges that they face. Will the Prime Minister show some compassion and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Canada is second in the G7 on health span, second only to Japan. We're 1 year longer than both France and Italy in terms of the number of years we live in good health. We are 2 years better than the United Kingdom. We are 6 years longer than the United States. You know, when you're talking about things that have been gone for a long time, let's talk about what's happening with measles. Let's talk about what's happening with misinformation generally. The approach to attacking public health that the Conservatives are taking, the attack on information, puts lives at risk and fundamentally endangers our health system, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Toronto St. Paul's.
Fact. This Liberal Prime Minister is out of touch. First, he gets on a gas-guzzling jet. Then, he glorifies the punishing carbon tax that Canadians pay. And everyone who disagrees, he says, quote, they're using propaganda, misinformation, and flat-out lies. Meanwhile, more than 1 in 10 people in Toronto are using food banks, and 87% of them are living in unaffordable housing. Enough is enough. Why won't the Prime Minister treat Canadians like adults, let them decide, and call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a fact that 300 economists in this country have all said that a price on pollution is an effective way to reduce emissions, and the majority of Canadians actually get more money back in rebates. It is a fact that the Parliamentary Budget Officer said exactly the same thing. On this side of the House, we have a plan that is about addressing affordability issues. It is about growing a clean economy for the future, and it is about fighting climate change. My goodness, it is time that some of those folks across the way at least accept the reality of climate change and have something positive to say.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, we know the Conservative leaders had a rough week because of the scandals surrounding his plan to cut the housing agreement with Quebec. Today we announced a significant plan to invest in housing in Quebec, which will add thousands of social and affordable housing units to the existing stock. Can the Minister of Public Services and Procurement tell this House about the impact of today's announcement and the potential impact of the Conservative leaders' cuts for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Good news, Mr. Speaker. We announced this morning $92 million being added to the historic agreement with Quebec. They're building 3,000 new housing units. It's a big problem for the Conservative leader who says that that housing simply doesn't exist. What would the Conservative leader do that would affect the Conservative members from Quebec, where there are hundreds of these housing units currently being built? How long are they going to put up with this?
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing. The failing Liberal housing plan is not building more homes. Housing starts are down last month compared to 2023. 11% in Canada, 30% in BC, and 87% in Kelowna. I've talked to home builders and residents in my community who all support the common sense Conservative plan to axe the GST on new homes sold under $1 million. Will the NDP Liberals agree with home builders and families and axe the GST on new homes sold?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I am very happy to correct the record that my Conservative colleagues put on the floor of the House of Commons. Housing starts are actually up this month 8% compared to last month, and year over year are trending in a positive direction, near the all-time record home building pace that Canada has ever seen. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that this question would come from this particular member who represents the city of Kelowna, which received $31.5 million to build thousands and thousands of more homes. Not only is she opposed to that investment, her leader is barring her and every one of her colleagues from advocating on behalf of their communities. I came here to represent my community in Ottawa, not to take my leader's words back home.
The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Police associations nationwide are demanding urgent bail legislation to keep our communities safe. Yet just this morning, a stolen BMW crashed into a Toronto bus, injuring 9 people, 2 critically. 2 of the 4 accused were, surprise, surprise, out on bail, including 1 for a violent robbery. If the safety and security of Canadians is no longer a priority for this Prime Minister, will he call an immediate election so that Conservatives can bring jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the incident this morning in Toronto is a concern for all of us in this House, all of us who believe in prioritizing public safety and community safety. What's concerning and what people need to understand is that calls for bail reform echoed in this chamber 18 months ago. We responded, tabled legislation, and with the cooperation of all parties, we got it passed. Now the ball goes to the province's court. What we need to ensure is that that very person who should have been detained, did the Crown contest that bail? Did the Crown decide to appeal the bail if the bail decision was made in error? Was there enough space in detention facilities run by the province to hold that person in detention? These are important questions. We need answers.
I'm going to invite the honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou, please, to not take the question, or not take the floor unless is recognised by the Speaker. L'honorable député de
The honourable member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, crime is everywhere in Canada, and the Liberal government is willfully blind. Even the leader of the Bloc says there's no crime in our regions. We read this morning that a mother will have to pay $7,000 a year for car insurance because her car has been stolen multiple times. It's always our constituents who end up paying for the inaction of this Liberal government. When will this Bloc Liberal government punish crime, even in rural Canada? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, our colleague is falsely using the term inaction. He knows full well that our government for many years now has been investing in the police, whether it's the RCMP, the CBSA, or even our provincial and municipal partners in fighting auto theft. This situation is wholly unacceptable to Canadians, and what's good news is that the number of cars being stolen is decreasing, but that's not enough. We will continue to do everything we can to support our police and put an end to this situation.
Honourable member from Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, from the rising cost of living to climate change, we know young people today face unique challenges. Their mental health needs are complex. Our government is making sure that young Canadians get the care they need, when and where they need it. It's a promise we put forward in 2021 to build a stronger, more resilient Canada. Today, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions announced the launch of the Youth Mental Health Fund. Can she share details about this historic investment with the House?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Scarborough Agincourt for being such a tremendous, unwavering advocate for mental health in this country. Mr. Speaker, community organizations are the lifeline when it comes to mental health. That's local and that is trusted. This fund, $500 million investment, once in a generation, to make a difference for our youth, to make sure that they have access to the services that they trust the most, adding capacity, filling gaps, and making sure we meet them where they're at. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about the youth of today, we want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to thrive, because when they thrive, Canada succeeds.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, a UN report has found that Israel's warfare in Gaza is consistent with the characteristics of genocide. The Liberal government is legally obligated by the Genocide Convention to prevent and stop Netanyahu's attack on Palestinians. Turning a blind eye to mass casualties is not an option. Entire families have been decimated. Children are starving to death. When will the Liberals live up to their obligations, sanction Netanyahu and his extreme cabinet, and finally put in place an actual arms embargo?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, before he takes the floor, I just want to encourage all members, to remind members to be very careful about what they wear in this House to ensure that it is not considered a prop. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think everyone in this House realizes that the situation in Gaza is dire, that the situation faced by men, women, and children in Gaza is horrendous, and we will continue to seek every possible way to find peace with justice in this situation. However, rhetoric doesn't help, symbols don't help. Hard work, diplomacy, and engagement will be what Canada needs to do on this every day. We'll continue to do our part to bring peace in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, many closed work permit holders have their renewal applications rejected for want of an impact assessment, either through ignorance or haste. They only find out about the problem at the deadline, and as a result, their application gets rejected. Why doesn't the department take the simple step of letting them know by email about the missing documents so as to avoid work interruptions, impacts on families and businesses, and unnecessary costs for businesses, immigrants, and government alike?
None are happy to...
The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, it's very important for us to be able to have work permits when employers need them. So I will work with the member to help us solve this problem.
I see that the Honourable Minister is rising on a point of order. The Honourable Minister for International Development.